My friends and I decided to go camping one spring break. We had planned a week in advance, and as the day got closer, the weather got worse. It was cold and gray, unheard of for Arkansas. The night finally came with yet another cold front. It was in the 30s, but we had dressed warm and stocked up on whiskey and beer. The plan was to hit a spot my buddy knew, which was barely accessible with a 4x4. He wanted to really camp, none of those designated sites for families and seniors in RVs. So, we aimed away from civilization, which was only made up by a single stoplight and a couple hundred people, and drove into the woods. After 30 minutes of bone-rattling dips across dry creek beds and detours around trees, it started to rain. By the time we found camp, it had turned into hail. The spot was marked by an ancient dirt road a few hundred feet long, and the rotting carcass of a VW bug. That night was spent passing a bottle around, hoping we'd figure out the tents before we were too drunk. Eventually, we did, and managed to start a fire with diesel. At this point, the hail had stopped. The empty whiskey bottle lay broken in the fire, and we had a decent pile of empties growing. We drank, played cards, and then passed out in our tents. The next morning, I gradually regained consciousness to the sound of something large being dragged past my tent. It was what looked to have once been a station wagon, stripped and rust-covered, dragging the VW with a chain. The VW had been there for so long that the floor had rotted out and roots had tied it to the forest floor. They lay scattered in the wake of the wagon. A woman was driving. A man beside her and 3 shirtless kids sat in the back where there used to be seats. The man stared out of the window away from us the entire time. The children had dirt smeared on their faces, which illuminated their glassy 1,000-yard stares. It's the look of crushing poverty, and you've probably only seen it in pictures. It exists in war-torn countries, the projects in inner cities, and the deep south. So deep that the old gas station back in town, a place that you'd probably jokingly hum the Deliverance theme, that was the city to these people. She spoke in a deep, nicotine and whiskey-soaked drawl. "Y'all come from the city to do some camping? Well, reckon that's fine, long as you ain't doing no drugs. Y'all ain't doing no drugs, are ya?" We weren't. "Just drinking then? Hell, I like a drink now and again my damn self. That's fine, that's just fine. You wanna know how I knowed y'all was here? Seen them black helicopters flying around? Them some boys that work for me, see? This is my land, and they told me. Can't be too careful. I figured I'd best check it out." She started laughing. Mucus bubbled up to wet her dry cackle, while the man stared out at nothing. One of the children put both hands on the window and gazed through us. His mouth hung open and spit cut a line through the filth on the glass. He was probably 10 years old. "Y'all know Bethany?" We didn't. "Ha! Everyone knows old Beth. Y'all go to church?" I lied. "Good. Ain't got no time for those that don't fear God. Why don't you come on to church tomorrow? You can meet Bethany. It's just over the hill up there, can't miss it. Boy, she sure like to meet y'all. They all would." We assured her we would. She drove away into the trees, slowly dragging the VW. As soon as she left, we all looked at each other and started laughing. It was just nerves. There wasn't anything funny about it. We all have the remnants of a primitive warning system for danger. It's been eroded by living safe and civilized, but every once in a while, it goes off and you obey it without a question. Something is wrong. It started before she even spoke. When I looked into her eyes, something is wrong. The kids, the man, her laugh. Something is wrong. Eventually, we did hike up the hill. You could see for a mile. There was nothing. No buildings, no clearings, just forest. We cut our trip short, packed up, and left before noon. This takes place in March 2011. I was 19 at the time. Also, I'm a female. During my spring break as a sophomore in college, I had the pleasure of traveling around Europe with my friend and her roommates, who were all studying abroad in Florence, Italy that semester. From Florence, we went to Paris, Paris to Amsterdam, Amsterdam to London, hit up Dublin for St. Patrick's Day, and then returned to London. I decided to spend one of my days in London hanging out with my friend Mark. Mark lives in London, whereas I live in the States, so this was a perfect opportunity to catch up. My friend and her roommates were all going to do touristy things that I had already done on a previous trip to London. The majority of my day with Mark consisted of people watching in Trafalgar Square, scouring Chinatown for chicken balls, and then people watching again in Leicester Square. Around 4 p.m., we hit the Barclay ATM on Charing Cross Road and basically just walked around town. At around 7:30, Mark had to head back home. That was totally fine since I had to regroup with my friends at 8:30 at the Burger King in Leicester Square. Mark was about to head underground to catch his train, but we both got sidetracked by a couple arguing. Well, it was mostly a man ass blasting a woman, but it was like watching a train wreck. You knew you should probably look away, but you just couldn't. One of the things that made it so crazy to me was that they were arguing in a very crowded area, and people were watching. The man didn't seem to care, but the woman did. She was passively trying to get him off her back, until a gentleman nearby approached with a police officer, and the argument was done. That was that. Mark and I hugged goodbye and parted ways. And I realized at that time that I needed more cash from the ATM. I checked my watch, 8 p.m. Well, the closest ATM I could think of was the one on Charing Cross Road. It was just down the street from the station, so whatever, and I had plenty of time. I go to the ATM and do my business. I stand in front of the ATM to sort my wallet back together. "Excuse me." I turned around, surprised to see a shorter Indian man. He had glasses, was wearing a gray hoodie, striped shirt, and sweatpants. He had a gray plastic bag with him, and was also carrying a backpack. "Oh, sorry." I moved out of the way so he could use the ATM. I continued to sort through my wallet, but I could feel him staring at me. "Excuse me," he said again. Might be important to note that he had a slight Indian accent, but his speech sounded like he had an American twang rather than a British one. I assumed he needed directions or something. "Yes?" "I saw you here at this ATM with your friend earlier, and I thought you were very beautiful. Would you like some fruit?" He opened up his plastic bag, in which there was an open container of pineapple, no lid. It was as if he just walked right up to me and waved red flags in my face. At first, my thinking was, "Aw, how sweet." And then I actually realized what he said. He saw me there with my friend earlier. Earlier, as in 4 hours earlier. I'm sure that I could stretch out some perfectly reasonable scenarios that would explain why he had seen me at the ATM 4 hours ago, and then returned here now, for the specific purpose of talking to me, I guess. He wasn't using the ATM when I got there, and he wasn't using it now. As for the sketchy bag of pineapples, the container seemed full, and it was one of those plastic containers that you could buy the pineapple chunks in at the store. But the lid was missing. Why was the lid missing? You could argue that he probably just tossed the lid so he could eat them easily while walking around, but the container was literally full. It all just seemed really weird. "No thanks," I said, putting my wallet in my purse. "Yes, as I said, I saw you here earlier, and I thought you were very beautiful. Maybe we can be friends. Can I have your phone number?" Well, I don't really have a phone. I don't live in this country." "What's that?" He pointed to my British, pay-as-you-go phone in my pocket. Fuck. "Oh, well, this is my pay-as-you-go phone. Give me your number." He took his phone out, ready to type. I don't really know the number. Give me a second." I went through my address book and found the phone number of an old acquaintance. I knew it to be out of service, so I had no problem giving him the number. Now, I thought he would just add the number to his phone and be like, text me sometime, but he wasn't adding my number to his contacts. He was dialing it, and of course, when he dialed it, it was clear that the number was out of service. "This is not your number," he glared at me. "It is. I guess I ran out of minutes. I guess I'll have to add more. Nice to meet you." He opened the plastic bag and thrust it out at me again. "Why don't you just have some fruit?" For some reason, it was only then that it dawned on me that I was in a very public area. There was no need for me to just sit here and diplomatically talk my way out of being kidnapped or drugged or whatever. Either this guy really was just some creepy asshole who wanted to try and woo me or whatever and was very misguided as to how to go about this, or he was the world's dumbest kidnapper. Either way, the ball was really in my court. I turned around and started walking to Burger King. He followed me. "Please, wait, I just want to be friends." I ignored him and prepared to make a left on Bear Street. "Just have some fruit. Please, try my fruit." I made the left on Bear Street, and in front of the zoo, I took note of how crowded the street was. Unfortunately though, I couldn't locate a police officer. I didn't know where to even find one really, but I remembered that couple earlier, and the idea came into my head to make a scene. I stopped and turned around to face the guy. "Please, you are so beautiful. Why don't you just try my..." "Why are you like this? I made it very clear that I don't know you, and yet you're still following me." Out of the corner of my eye, I could see several people stopping what they were doing and watching. One couple was slowly inching their way over, looking pissed as hell. My fruity little friend seemed to know what was going on as well. "No, I didn't." He was closing up the plastic bag, trying to tie it shut now. "You even admitted that you were following me around London all day. Stop following me. I don't know you." I spun around again and marched the rest of the way to Burger King. I turned around at the doors to see if he was still following me, but he was nowhere to be found. That couple was standing about where I'd been, talking animatedly with one another, pointing off in the opposite direction. I know, my story isn't as dramatic as some of the others on here, but that guy was totally weird. Even to this day, I wonder what his true intentions were, and if those pineapples were drugged or something. He really wanted me to eat them. I was creeped out in the beginning, but once I kind of realized how much control I had over the situation, it was just more annoying than anything. But since he had seen me go to the ATM at 4 and waited 4 hours until I was alone, I'm getting the impression that his intentions were probably more on the devious side. I'm a 20-year-old female, and this took place back in March. I was 19 years old at the time. It was the end of spring break, and I was returning to Texas from California. I had just spent my vacation with my sister, who lives in San Francisco. Every college kid counts down the days until spring break, and my vacation had gone rather well. However, I was slightly okay with returning to essays and research papers, because I missed my friends, my bed, and my cat. Maybe not in that particular order. I was flying alone, something I don't like doing for multiple reasons, and had only one layover in Dallas. I don't like traveling alone because I've had some bad experiences. I happen to look a lot younger than 20. Most often, people say that I look 13 or 14 at the most. I've always hated this about myself, but I'm told I'll be grateful when I'm older. As of now, it's just immensely frustrating. The last time I was on a plane by myself, the attendant thought I was an unaccompanied minor named Taylor. I quickly assured her that I was not the minor in question. The time before that, I was asked to move away from the emergency exit because you have to be at least 16 to sit there. Anyways, my boyfriend was picking me up from the airport, and I was excited. I wore the pink members-only jacket he had bought for me and tried to look my best, which is difficult to do while traveling. When the plane arrived in Dallas, we had some really terrible weather and the turbulence was scary, but no matter, soon I would be on another flight to Houston, I took the train around to the C terminal and made my way to my gate, only to find that, due to torrential rain and lightning, my flight had been cancelled. I was crushed, but determined, so I took my ticket to be exchanged for a later flight. It seemed that many others had the same grievance and were opting to do the same. As I was standing in line, a friendly-looking older man came up to stand behind me. "Are you alone?" he asked me. Everyone seemed to be conversing with one another, complaining about the weather and pondering their options to get home. It didn't seem like a big deal because strangers always seem to connect in situations like this one. We were all frustrated. I also felt safe in the crowded airport, so I answered him truthfully and continued to wait in the line. The man behind the counter said I was in luck, that there were only 2 seats left on another flight to Houston, and that I could make it if I hurried. I rushed aboard the train to the A terminal to catch my new flight, and upon reaching the gate, was faced with the same situation. This new flight was cancelled too. The man from before had followed me to the gate and was in the same boat. I exchanged my ticket for a later flight, and resolutely marched myself to the new gate, only to be told the same as before. This happens literally 2 or 3 more times because I didn't want to give up and really had no other options. The man shadowed me during the entire ordeal, but I didn't really find it strange. We were just 2 individuals stranded in an airport. The last gate I went to, I noticed he was still following me. He walks over to me and begins to chat about what awful luck we were having. Someone eavesdropping nearby suggests that I rent a car. I politely tell them that I'm not old enough. The man smiles and says to me, "Well, I'm old enough to rent a car. How about this? I'll rent us one. You can sleep and I'll drive." I look at him, and the way he's staring at me scares me. I finally begin to feel that something is off. I respond, "No, but thank you. I'm going pretty far." His smile falters for a moment, and then he suggests that he buy me some food. I'm starving. I'm tempted. I hesitate for a moment, but I remember a book I had read about a girl who's stolen from the airport after a man who drugs her coffee. This gives me the strength to deny my grumbling stomach and decline him again. He follows me. I don't know why. He's already told me he's going to rent a car and leave. He points to a Mexican restaurant and says, "How about this place?" He has this strange look on his face and is standing far too close to me. I shake my head and say, "I told you, I'm not really hungry." Lie. A big lie. I can smell something delicious, and I almost give in. But my face doesn't give in to my hunger, and I keep my pace. "Okay, what about burgers then?" He looks a bit annoyed. This guy does not give up easy, and I ignore him. This causes him to glare at me angrily and then stomp away. I breathe a sigh of relief. I call my sister to tell her about him, not in a catty sort of way, just, "Oh wow, this guy was persistent," kind of thing. I settle into a chair to think about my options. I feel pretty alone and worried. My latest ticket has me leaving around midnight, and it was about 9 p.m. at that point. I had been in the airport since 5 p.m. If this last flight didn't work out, I had no clue what I would do. I had no money for a hotel, and didn't fancy sleeping in a chair. The last time I fell asleep in public, on a train in France, a lady attempted to steal my backpack, but that's another story. I look up about 30 minutes later to see the same man walking towards me. I tuck my legs up in my chair nervously and pretend to play on my phone. "Hey there, you still here?" he asks. He seems to have cooled down. I just stare at him. He clears his throat and tries again. "So, I was thinking, you should come stay at my aunt's house with me for the night. Ask where I'm staying tonight. It wouldn't be a problem. You don't want to be in this airport all night, all alone." I shake my head and say, "No, I'm fine." Then turn my attention back to my phone. I didn't even make eye contact. It felt really uncomfortable. He tries to convince me and I have to say no firmly several more times. He looks angry, really angry. His hands are clenched, and his smile is obviously fake. It looks as if he will shatter his teeth if he clenches his jaw any tighter. I wonder to myself why he hasn't left the airport yet. Then, I notice that his luggage is no longer with him. He was rolling it behind him, and now he isn't. Where would he have put it if he hadn't left yet? And so much time had passed. Why is he back here? As I'm thinking all this, he's just standing there, staring. After what feels like forever, he storms off again. I feel so anxious because of him that I grab my things and move to a different gate to wait. My phone was dying, and I didn't want to be without it, so to charge it, I had to plug it into the outlet in the floor. I curled up in the aisle between the chairs to wait. My sister called about an hour later, and I was talking to her, telling her how creepy the dark weather outside looked. When I see him, again, walking around, glancing here and there in search of me. I hunched down even farther, but my pink jacket was like a beacon. He locked eyes with me, and I looked down. My sister said to stay on the phone, so I did. "Well, there you are," he says, not even acknowledging that I'm in the middle of a phone call. I continue talking to my sister. When it becomes apparent that he isn't leaving and doesn't care that I'm on the phone, I finally look up. "So you're still here? Look, you need to come with me. You can stay with me at my grandparents' tonight. They would love to have you. They won't mind me bringing you and all. Just come with me." I got chills. I don't know why, but something in his eyes told me he was lying. Lying through those shiny white teeth of his. "You said you were staying with your aunt." His face dropped. It went from cool and collected to something else. Not even anger this time. And not defeat either. Almost like amusement. Something like the cat that ate the canary. He shrugs his shoulders like I tried, but we both recognize that he was caught in his lie. The entire time my sister is saying hello repeatedly, but I was sort of shocked by how indifferent he was to me catching on to him. I go back to my conversation and he says, "If you change your mind," and lets the thought trail off while walking away backwards, eyes still on me. I call my boyfriend and tell him about each exchange, and he tells me to find a security guard to tell. I look around for one, but couldn't find any. It was creepy because I've never seen an airport so deserted. I end up just deciding to move again and lie down between two different aisles out of view. A boy my age walks by and asks, "Why are you lying on the floor?" And I respond a tad aggressively with, "Because I want to." He laughs and puts his hands up, the unspoken sign for, "Whoa, take it easy." I apologize for my gruffness and tell him that a man was making me nervous. He jokingly says that he'll protect me, and because he seems harmless and I mention my boyfriend, I converse with him for a while. He tells me he saw me and wondered why the blonde girl looked so sad. A little while later, I am thankful I didn't brush off this stranger because I see the man again walking around. We made eye contact, but he didn't attempt to approach me because I was no longer alone. Maybe he was just a middle-aged man trying his luck at getting a girlfriend or something, but scaring someone isn't the way to do it, even if he meant me absolutely no harm. This happened in my 4th year at university. I had moved from abroad on an exchange year and was living in student accommodation in England. The building was an old factory converted into student housing. It had 4 floors and was square, with a courtyard in the center. Each floor had a connecting corridor that would run from one side of the building to the other. The corridor was then separated in 8 self-contained flats of 4 bedrooms. The separations between the flats were like fire doors. These doors could only be opened by breaking a fire seal or by having a master key, which would set off an alarm as experienced in the first few weeks when students were trying to sneak into other flats without having to go through the courtyard. Each fire door had a see-through window from one flat to the other. It was sometime in the spring break of 2005. All the local students had gone home for Easter, but I couldn't afford the plane ticket back to visit my parents. I was alone on my floor, except for a few students in another aisle of the building who were sharing a flat together. I was actually relishing having the whole flat for myself, without the endless parties and general mess that comes with shared student accommodation. Actually having time to write my dissertation and maybe grab a decent night's sleep without anyone screaming or switching on corridor lights in the middle of the night. The bedroom doors had big gaps underneath and the light could wake you, and as my bedroom was next to the fire door dividing the flats, I could always enjoy my flatmates and neighbors' antics. That evening, I had watched a movie on my computer, probably Silence of the Lambs or Big Fish, as they were the only two DVDs that I owned at the time. Then, I turned off the computer and went to bed. Now remember, the whole floor is empty of students. No lights coming from corridors or kitchens. No lights in my bedroom and blackout curtains drawn. My flatmates are with their family and there is no noise in the building. I am confident that I have locked the main entrance and my bedroom door, and I do not need to worry about the fire doors as they are locked and alarmed. I feel safe. How wrong I was. In the middle of the night, I wake up and feel a presence in the room. It is hard to describe as I actually couldn't see, but on instinct, I don't move or make a noise, except for my heart pounding. I hold my breath and wait. Now, I have tinnitus, constant ringing in the ears, so I cannot hear faint noises. But trust me, I didn't need to hear. I actually felt the person in the room move, and I just knew, that they were standing right next to my bed. Fear takes over. I stand up on my bed and scream the loudest and biggest scream that I can muster, and I am ready to pounce on this person, who has their back to me, as I can now make out the faint light coming from a tiny torch or a phone screen. But they're faster than me. In one jump, they reach my bedroom door, and with another jump, they're out through the fire door. I grab my phone on my bedside table and run out of my bedroom. I unlock my flat door and sprint directly to the security office a block away in my pajamas and bare feet. I talk to the security guard on duty, who doesn't believe me. Through the fire door, you say? But the alarm didn't go off. I still make him come back to the flat and check. The fire door is unlocked, and the security guard proceeds to lock it again, and then open it with his master key, with no alarm sounding. I'll have the engineer check it in the morning. I also made him check the CCTV, but we couldn't see anything or anybody running out in the courtyard. Go back to bed, love. It must have been a nightmare. I know that it wasn't a nightmare. How do you explain the fire door being unlocked? And I know I had locked my bedroom door. And if no one exited the building, it didn't mean that the person was still within it. From that point on, and until the end of the academic year, I did not sleep without my phone on me, and I pushed my chair against my bedroom door to prevent anyone from opening it. I also learned to love my noisy flatmates. It meant that I wasn't alone. I never found out who it was. My flatmates thought that it was a previous student with a double of the flat keys, looking for loots in what they thought was an empty building. And they also joked that maybe he was a secret admirer who had come to observe me in my sleep. We'll never know. And honestly, I guess I prefer not to. This story takes place last April. I was a senior in high school. I've lived my whole life in the Midwest, so I was always eager for spring break when I would vacation to somewhere more interesting. This year, I was going to Oregon with my friend Mary. Mary was 3 years older than me and dating my best friend Josh, who was attending the University of Oregon. She happened to be moving there the week of my spring break, so It was perfect for me to ride along. We set off on our journey on Friday night at 10:30 p.m. I know, a weird time to leave, but it was nice to get through Chicago in the middle of the night to escape traffic. We spent most of Saturday driving through flat, boring farmland. We got to see the Badlands National Park, which was pretty cool, especially after such a boring day. At around 11 that night, we were both exhausted, so we called and booked a hotel in Montana, about 3 hours away. We were starting to enter the section of this part of the country that was pretty much just a ton of Native American reserves when we turned down a long, beat-up road. Only one other car was on this road, and it was a large white truck that had been behind us for a while. We drove on this road for a few miles before this car started riding our ass. We slowed down and let him pass, and he floored it. Again, us being exhausted, we saw this as an opportunity to get to our hotel faster. We figured it was a local that knew he could speed without any trouble, so we sped down the road just a few miles per hour less than him to make our trip shorter. And we came to a stop and he turned left, which we also happened to be doing. He pulled into a parking lot for a bar that was just on the corner as we continued, but he didn't park. He just waited, and as we passed, he pulled out behind us. Now, I'm a very paranoid person, so I told Mary that I thought he was following us, but she reassured me that he probably just didn't want us behind him, because some people are like that. I agreed and we kept on. I was still nervous, but I watched him turn off the road, and my mind was at ease. Fast forward about a half an hour, and Mary's starting to show obvious signs of exhaustion in her demeanor, so I offered to drive the rest of the way. She said okay, and that she'd pull off at the next chance. The problem was, the road we were on didn't connect with any other roads. There were no driveways or stores, or really anything except for wide open plains for miles. She decided to pull off the road to make the switch, but as she started to pull over, a bright set of headlights came out of nowhere and looked like they were in the back of her car. This guy ran us off the road and we almost crashed. We came to a stop and both looked at each other like, what the fuck was that? But before we could say anything, the car from behind pulled up like 15 yards ahead of us, and it was the white truck from before. My heart sank and I said, Mary, don't get out of the car, just keep driving. Do not stop. She was obviously weirded out at this point, but wasn't totally convinced that it was all that dangerous. But she saw I was scared and started to creep back on the road. The guy ahead must have seen us moving as he started to drive too. We stopped again and he drove slowly, about a quarter mile up the road, and turned off into a patch of trees and killed his headlights. I told her that I was sure he was following us. We'd been driving forever, and what were the odds that we'd encountered each other again? She called Josh so we could get a third opinion. He was never the type to assume the worst, and he wasn't there, so he told us that it was probably a coincidence, and that we should keep driving and be wary. So we continued on for another 20 minutes without seeing him. But when we passed through another small town, I spotted him. He was sitting at a stop sign on a side road, facing the road we were on, with his lights off. We passed by him, he turned on his lights and started driving again, right on our tail. And at this point, Mary was convinced and she immediately dialed 911. We were in the middle of nowhere though, and her phone kept dropping the call. The dispatcher said that they couldn't get a read on our location and asked where we were, but not even the map on my phone would load. We felt like we were dead already. He passed us again, and I shouted for Mary to speed up so I could write his plate number down. We got it right before he sped off out of sight. The dispatcher was able to find us and told us to head to the nearest police station, about 15 or 20 minutes away. She also told us to not stop driving, and that this guy was a professional at what he was doing. She informed us that his tactic of passing us was so he could know where we were turning and going, so we could always be one step ahead. Fear sank in to both of us when we realized that he knew exactly where we were, even when we didn't know where he was. We drove on, with him popping up behind us once more and again speeding off. I got the police station pulled up on my phone, and we were almost there. We stopped at the light where we were supposed to turn right, but we hadn't seen the guy in a while, and this looked like the perfect road to sneak around on. I didn't tell Mary to turn. She kept driving. She asked me where it was, and I felt guilty not telling her, so I told her that we passed it, and that my phone hadn't loaded the directions until just then. She made a U-turn, and we headed back. On the way there, we passed the guy. He was headed the way we were going before turning around, and we don't think he saw us. We made it to the police station, where they were expecting us, and they sent cars out to find him. We got a police escort to our hotel an hour away, and the rest of our trip was as normal as could be. And we calculated that he followed us for somewhere around 60 or 70 miles. We don't know if he was caught, nor do we know what his intentions were. But I still get chills whenever I tell this story, and whenever I see a similar white truck. Remember this story when you're taking long road trips, and don't forget to always check what's behind you. This happened in the mid-90s. I was about 5 years old, and my family decided to go on a trip to Fiji over spring break. My parents, aunts, and uncles grew up there, so we weren't solely there as tourists. The first few days, we stayed with relatives, and got the local experience, which was a lot of fun, honestly. It was mine and my older brother's first time there. There was a big group of us visiting. Me, my brother, and a handful of our cousins around the same age, and all of our parents. I was the youngest. After visiting relatives, the adults decided to rent a beachside house for the remainder of the trip. We were all really excited about the view and being so close to the beach. The house was really big too. To this day, it's the biggest and nicest house I've ever had a chance to stay in. Anyway, we swam, hiked, sat around a bonfire, and did all the usual outdoorsy stuff. The first night was so much fun, and it's so deeply ingrained in my memory. The second night, however, the adults decided to go out for a few hours and leave the older kids to care for the younger ones. They weren't going to be gone long. They said they would come back at 10 o'clock at the very latest, and the house had a security system installed, so no one was really worried about anything happening. Plus, it was the 90s. Being the oldest of the kids at 17, my brother was left in charge. We had 3 cousins with us. 2 boys, 11 and 15 years old respectively, and 1 girl of 15. I was rooming with my female cousin, and the boys were rooming together, while the adults had their own private rooms. So, I was the youngest by a long shot. Anyway, us kids decided to go to the beach while the sun was still out. An hour or 2 max. We packed up our beach gear and took off. The house was still in view. We didn't stray too far away. We were basically just in the backyard. My female cousin, Joanna, didn't let me out of her sight. In fact, she stayed with me and built sandcastles the entire time. We took a bunch of pictures on her disposable camera, some of which are still tacked onto her fridge all these years later. We're still really close, and I look after her young daughter all the time. So, the older boys swam out and did their thing, while Joanna, Eric, and I stayed behind and played on the beach. Our plans of staying out for only a couple of hours soon turned into 3. It was only as the water became a little too aggressive that we decided to go back inside the house. Because my brother's an idiot, he forgot the key to the back door in his room, so we had to use the front door of the house, which required walking all the way around the gate and down the dirt road out front. We packed up our shit and took off, the 5 of us. It was pretty dark at this point. Joanna and I held hands the entire way. Eric was walking with us, while my brother brought up the rear, and my older cousin, Dean, took the lead in front. And we kept quiet while we were walking back, all of us tired from being out all day. Joanna and my brother exchanged a few words here and there. I was so tired, I had no idea what they were saying, and I didn't care. My only concerns were sleep and Game Boy. It was only as Dean slowed to a halt in front of us that I realized something was awry. There was a man walking toward us from the other side of the dirt road. I was very young at the time, but I remember the look of this man's face very clearly. He was old, Caucasian, very tan, and adorned in typical male tourist attire consisting of a tropical shirt, cargo shorts, sandals, and a straw hat. His clothes were straight out of a tropical getaway catalog. There were other houses in the area being rented out by people, so we all just figured he was in a neighboring property, walking home or something. Even so, my brother cut in front of Joanna, Eric, and I, just in case, and slowed at the same time the man did. The man introduced himself as Eddie and said he was lost, looking for directions to the house where he was staying. He appeared to be under the influence of something, kind of glassy-eyed and wobbly. He couldn't stand perfectly still. There was some swaying, and for whatever reason, his eyes went directly to Joanna. He would periodically look at her while my brother was giving him directions. It was around this time that Joanna, who had been holding my hand, squeezed my tiny fingers inside her slightly bigger ones. I could tell she was nervous. Even then, at 5 years old, I sensed there was something seriously wrong with the way this guy was looking at her. Eric, who up until that point had ignored me the whole trip because he wanted to look cool in front of the older boys, and took my other hand, and the 3 of us stood together, like a shaky wall behind Dean and my brother. I couldn't really hear the words that were being exchanged, and I just saw my brother gesturing as he was giving directions, pointing his arm back, to the left and whatnot. This lasted maybe 5 minutes before we were on our way. My brother made sure to walk beside Eddie for a minute, all the way past our shaky wall, and then he waved bye, and we all carried on to our house. The older kids exchanged a look with each other, but it didn't say anything. In fact, we didn't speak of Eddie at all. We entered the house, showered, and met in the kitchen for something to eat. My brother cooked for us, and we sat around the table talking about how much fun the beach was. And then we heard a knock on the front door. Expecting our parents, we didn't really think anything of it. The older kids were too lazy to get up and answer it, but Dean eventually caved. He went to the door, and I, being a curious 5-year-old, went with him. There were windows and a peephole on the door where Dean could have looked, but he didn't. He unlocked the door and opened it, his body language turning rigid as his eyes met Eddie's. Within seconds, Dean was on the defense, and he glanced back, motioning for me to go away and grab my brother. I waited a couple seconds before doing it, catching Eddie as he asked Dean if he could use the phone in the house. Apparently, he was too far away, and the long walk was killing his legs, so he wanted to call a cab. This was before the age of everyone and their mother having a cell phone, so showing up on someone's doorstep asking to use their phone wasn't terribly out of the ordinary. I skittered off to the kitchen and motioned for my brother to follow me. I guess he saw the mildly anxious look in my eyes, so he immediately dropped his food onto his plate and went to the door. Like Dean, his body went rigid when he saw Eddie. The 3 of them spoke at the door for a long time. Eddie was begging to use the phone, while Dean and my brother said they couldn't let him inside. They said if he really wanted to use it, he should wait until the adults come home and ask them instead. By telling him this, however, they had let slip the fact that us kids were home alone. They must have been going at it for at least 10 minutes. By this time, Joanna came out to see what was happening. I remember she rocked back when she saw Eddie at the door, breath catching in her chest. She glanced down at me and nodded for me to join Eric in the kitchen. I usually wouldn't have listened, but that night I did. I went back to the kitchen and told Eric what was going on at the door. Even though he was older than me, he used to get scared really easily. To this day, he's still very jumpy when it comes to horror movies and things. For this reason, he swallowed a dry lump in his throat and yanked me back when I took off to see what was going on. Sometime later, Joanna and Dean returned to the kitchen without my brother. I raced past them, poking my head around the corner to see that my brother had let Eddie inside the house, standing with him as he used the phone. It was attached to the wall in the long hallway. My brother leaned against the wall and kept his attention firmly on Eddie as the man dialed the number for the cab company and called one to our address. This took about a minute, after which Eddie thanked my brother and waved bye to me on his way out. My brother kept the front door open after, standing there and watching for a solid 20 or so minutes until the cab arrived and drove Eddie away in the back seat. Our parents came home maybe 10 minutes later, a car full of groceries in the trunk. As per my brother's request, we decided not to tell our parents about Eddie. If they knew we let a stranger inside to use the phone, they would have totally blown their shit. Rightfully, but still. We were kids, and my brother tried to sort the situation out as best he could. Plus, Eddie didn't really do anything per se. There was just something about him that was odd. The rest of the night went by without a hitch. In fact, 2 nights went by without anything weird happening. By this point, we had all forgotten about Eddie, at least I had. Joanna, on the other hand, kept a huge kitchen knife under her pillow just in case. I had no idea at the time. She told me this years later. On the 4th night at this house, the adults cracked open the barbecue outside, and we had a little cookout in the back. It was a really good time, and there was good food, cold drinks, a daily game of Monopoly, and even a little bit of storytelling from my slightly inebriated uncle, aka Dean and Eric's father. My parents told me I could stay up late with everyone, which I hadn't been allowed to do the entire time we were there thus far. Suffice to say, we were all having a good night. The stars were out, the waves were crashing softly on the shore, and the mosquitoes were biting the fuck out of us. My mother went inside to grab some repellent, and didn't return until a couple of minutes later. She went straight to my father after, without the insect repellent, and whispered something to him, a weary look on her face. The others noticed, eventually asking what was going on. She told them that some strange man was at the front door, knocking repeatedly. My father and sober uncle, Joanna's father, went over to check what all the fuss was about. They answered the door, asking Eddie what he wanted, who, to my memory, kept saying, "My buddy Will said I could swing by. Can I talk to my buddy?" Will is my brother's name. I remember thinking it was weird, the fact that he kept referring to my brother as his buddy. The adults found it very weird too. My father asked Eddie what he wanted, and why he wanted to talk to my brother. Eddie just kept saying that Will was his buddy and that he wanted to see him. He was very clearly on something. Drugs, alcohol, I don't know. There was something wrong with him. Eventually, Eddie said that he needed to use the phone again, and that Will had let him use it last time. The jig was up. My father glanced back at Will as he came up to see what was going on, and he gave him the death look. You know, the boy you done fucked up look. He knew better than to let strangers in the house, but that was the thing. Eddie had a way about him. He was odd, but at the same time, kind of disarming. You didn't know whether you wanted to knock him out or help him out. My father and uncle told Eddie he couldn't use the phone, but they did give him directions to the nearest convenience store, where he could ask for directions, find proper help, etc. Eddie tried to persuade them into letting him use the phone, but they firmly told him he had to leave, shutting the door in his face immediately after. Sometime later, we all went to bed. Joanna and I had stayed up a little later, and she read me a chapter out of the novel she had been reading the whole trip. It was Flowers in the Attic, in case you're curious. Certainly not the most appropriate novel for a child of 5, but I had no idea what half of it meant anyway. Plus, it was only the beginning. None of the crazy-ass tarred hair, resisting flesh, sleeping man stuff that went on later. In any case, I fell asleep, and a few hours later, I woke to the sound of Joanna's voice. She shook me awake and said that we had to hide in the bedroom for a bit. The look in her eyes was wide and full of fear, and without her telling me directly, I knew that this was about Eddie. She took me by the hand, and we locked ourselves in the bathroom. I noticed she kept touching the back pocket of her jeans, but I didn't know why. I later found out that she had tucked a knife in there and felt for it every few seconds to make sure she still had it. We hid for about an hour until we heard the police. I remember hearing their loud footsteps in the house, and I remember Joanna opening the door for them when they knocked on the bathroom to see where we were. I didn't know it then, but apparently Eddie had come to the house again while we were sleeping. And the boys' room was really warm that night, so the three of them had left the window open. Apparently, Eddie hovered by the window a second and quietly climbed inside. Eric, the poor thing, was the first to see him and scream bloody murder, waking up Dean and my brother. Eddie's eyes were bloodshot, and he was twitching all over the place, climbing in and asking his buddy to help him find the sweet girl from the other night. He was referring to Joanna. Every screw in his head was loose, and he began laughing, shouting and telling my brother that they could take turns on her, amongst other obscene things, all at the same time. It's like he couldn't decide if he was horny or angry. According to my brother and everyone else who restrained and held Eddie down that night, there was something incredibly off about him, other than the fact that he had broken into the house. The way he was talking, he was so delusional, as though he was fully convinced that Will was really his buddy, and that Joanna was really going to be his that night. It was apparently terrifying. To this day, my brother won't talk about it. He's the only one who refuses to recount his full version of the story. I think it has something to do with Eddie really, truly thinking they were old buds who had promised each other that they would use Joanna like a rag doll. This man was so fucking convinced. Anyway, their screaming woke up the adults, and my mother called the police right away, while my father and my two uncles held Eddie down until the cops got there. Joanna's mother raced upstairs and woke the girl up, telling her to grab me and hide until further notice. We had no idea if Eddie had come alone. My mother checked if the other windows and doors were closed and locked, and then she took Eric upstairs and waited with him in the hallway, trying to calm him down while the cops drove up. And it turns out, Eddie had some mental problems. He had become obsessed with Joanna after he first saw her. She was exactly his type. Young, of color, and unwilling. Oh, and we later found out Joanna wasn't the only girl he had harassed on his trip, but she was the only one whose house he had snuck into in search of her. Who knows what would have happened if he climbed through our window instead of the boys. So, Eddie, let's not meet again.